Okay, intro to part 26. Just a brief discussion before we get into it. This video, this chapter is going to be a lot of explaining about what I'm going to be doing for motor mounts, progress that I've made in getting parts for various items on the truck. But in past videos, I've explained that a lot of times I will film a video and pause because I am showing you this video in real time, and I'm pausing because I'm thinking about things that might be changing or having second thoughts about something or having brainstorms about how to do something. You're going to see that in real time in this video. So a lot of times I will shoot a video and then have to pull off of the project for a little while, maybe make a trip, or I didn't include that part of that clip into another part or chapter of the truck build. But so a lot of times videos are older and then new ideas come up. So you're going to see that in this video, and what I will do is I'm just going to show it to you, and if anything has changed since that video clip was made, I'll interject a little other video clip in there just explaining to you what was changing. So again, just bear with me. There's a lot of new developments on the truck, and a lot of things that I have been able to find that I was kind of concerned about as far parts that were needed for the build. But just bear with me and we'll get through it. Well, one of the things that I wanted to explain to you guys is when I do the engine mounts on this vehicle, I don't want to become like an automotive engineer where they don't give a shit about somebody that has to work on this. So it would be very easy for me to span from inside to inside, put a piece of metal in there, and then weld to that metal, bolt the metal to the frame, and then weld to the metal to span across to whatever height I would wanted to. But it would be like these braces that I have that are riveted in here that you really can't get out, because they are spanned from inside to inside and you really can't get them out. So I want to take into consideration somebody, and that somebody very well could be me too, having to get the transmission out or having to get the engine out. So the transmission is going to be supported on the back from the top, so that means that it has to drop down out of that bracket. So I can't come up underneath these things with a support because you wouldn't be able to drop it down. And it would be hell to get these things off of there. So I have got to come up with some concepts that's going to allow me to be able to take the engine out or the transmission out or get the cross support brackets out. So let me show you what I did. Is I went out and bought some material today from a metal supply house. Here is a piece of 1/4 inch plate steel that's 9 inches wide. Now I had them cut that because logically they don't make 9 inch wide plate steel. Here's a piece of plate steel 6 inches wide, 1/4 inch. Now let me take you over and show you some of the other things that I got. The frame rail on the truck is 2 1/4 inches wide. So what I'm going to do is grind these off so that they're 2 1/4. You can't get 2 1/4 inch angle iron. grind these up so they're 2 1/4, and then weld that plate, that 9-inch plate, onto it. So this leg is going to stick back in along the top leg of the rail. I'll cut this off and have another one on the bottom, and the 9-inch plate will be welded to it so that I can sandwich it in there and bolt that in. And then I am going to make the mount is going to be made out of plate steel also, and bolted onto that assembly. So if you wanted to drop the mount out, you could. I hope that makes sense. Let me take you over the frame and I'll show you what I'm. Here we are at the frame rail, and in here is 2 1/4 inches. So what I'm going to do is angle iron, lay it on top, angle iron up to the top of it with a plate welded in there so that it fits in there and is flush with the frame rails, bolted in. And then onto that there's going to be a plate, and then whatever my engine mount will be welded out of that plate, secondary plate, which is bolted onto this sub-assembly on the inside of it, so that I can unbolt it and pull the whole engine mount off. Okay guys, I got the radiator support off of the shelf and kind of stuck it up here temporarily. I gotta tell you, I'm really hopeful that not only is the radiator going to be able to go back in the front of the truck, it's also going to I'm probably going to be able to put a fan on that thing, a regular conventional fan. Now this is one of those times where I am going to insert a update on this thing, and instead of showing me just talking, I'm just going to kind of walk around the truck while I'm doing it. I am discussing putting that radiator support bracket on there, and the fan and the engine. Let me just say, anybody that's followed this series about this truck build knows from the beginning what I did was go out and got some measurements on an 8.3 engine and kind of compared it to the engine bay while the truck was still assembled and the original existing gas engine was in it. So that's kind of why I thought that the radiator and the fan and everything else would not fit into it, because I kind of took into consideration the height of the engine being the same as the height of the gasoline engine. I didn't realize that I would be able to drop it, thus getting the front of the block closer to the original front of the existing gas engine when it was in there. So now I'm kind of thinking that I'm going to be able to get that radiator back in. Well, actually at this point in time I kind of know it, but you're not going to hear that in the video. I'm just going to play the video out as I'm going along, and I'm going to be talking about the fan, getting an existing fan to put on the front of the engine, and that's probably not going to happen. What is going to happen is I'm probably going to electronic fans in front of, possibly in front, maybe behind the existing radiator, but I just wanted to put that in there. We'll continue on with the video. A lot of things have got to be taken into consideration here. This fan mounts off of this support here, so it kind of sticks out about that far. So I don't know. And will that original radiator from this truck support this engine? got to just take it into consideration, or take it in and kind of research what the cooling capacity of the radiator has to be to support this engine. But I got to tell you, it's looking real good. Now, you can see I've just got it sitting in the mounting holes of the front of it. I've got this board up here supporting it. But the one drawback of the whole damn thing is that line represents the firewall. Now, I might be able to shift the engine a little farther forward when I put that bracket in, the new bracket in, but also that engine is probably going to be sitting lower. So, okay, another long pause in real time here. Probably what I'm thinking about is that mark that I just showed you in relationship to a lowered engine in the cab. Let me take you over and we'll just take a look at that cab, the firewall of that cab, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Now, there is that firewall. But again, this cab kind of sits up proud of that proud of those frame rails. I mean, the sides go down a little bit over the edge of it, but basically it kind of sets up a little bit proud of it. Let me just let me see the pulleys on that thing, see what a fan would be. Let me take you back over to the engine. Okay, so you might be getting blown out by the light here, but these 4 bolts that stick out house this thing, and this is what houses the fan. So the fan is up in here, so I might be able to lower that engine quite a bit. But let me go through this. I'm not sure where the hell to get a fan. Let me go through this and see if I can figure something out. It'd be very nice if I could move that radiator or that engine block a little forward. That would help immensely in having to not build the dog coop. So that's kind of where I am with the engine relationship to the radiator support in the front. But let me bring you back and show you some other things. Let me share some thoughts with you and some information with you about the Ford 750. As you saw in my last video, I had kind of rested the engine in place in preparation for having to build the mounts and needing to figure out how it was going to fit in there in relationship to the cab, the front radiator, and let me jump into that right away. In all of the videos that I have produced about this, fitting this A3 engine into this thing, I told you that I couldn't do it without relocating the radiator to the back. The engine was going to set too far forward. Well, here's what is going to happen. As you can see, what I've done is brought that front, let's call it the radiator support, the front cowling that supports the radiator down off of the shelf and put it onto the frame. And you can see what I have in there. Now the radiator does sit proud of this thing, and that is a very thick radiator. And let me get into the radiator in a minute, but that is a very thick radiator. It's probably a good 2.25 inches thick. But what I am going to be able to do is keep it in that position, because I am going to lower the engine drastically to get it to fit. First of all, because I'm not going to put a fan on the engine, what I'm going to do is use that existing radiator, and I'm going to use electric fans on the radiator, in front of the radiator, blowing through the radiator. And when I say fans, it's probably plural. It's going to be 2 of them, because one of the things is a front hood latch support post goes right through the center of this thing to stiffen the thing up for the hood latch and the release mechanism. So probably there's going to have to be 2 fans, one on each side of it. That hasn't been totally decided yet, but that's kind of what I'm thinking. So there's going to be no fan on the front of the engine. The fans are going to be in front of the radiator, so which means that I can push this engine forward a little bit. And by lowering it and pushing it forward, I achieve 2 things. Hopefully I can reduce that size of the little bump out that I am probably going to have to create in the floor pan of the truck for the backside of the engine. And it is also going to get the transmission down lower so that it stays clear of the cab, and I can support the top of that, the rear of the transmission, off of a support or some kind of bracket that I might have to make in the cab. Probably better off would be the support and not the cab as a support structure. But those are some of the things that are going on. Now, it gets very complicated. When I went to, you can find motor mount brackets for this A3 engine. What is extremely hard to find is the rubber pieces that isolate the motor vibration, shaking, torque from the frame. It's extremely hard to find them. I did find a company that provides 2 of them for the rear. They're round pillar type things, so that this piece would go down on it. Not that I might not be using that piece, but I can build something similar to it to utilize those round rubber dampers. I have not found a rubber dampener for the front bracket. Can find that front bracket, but I cannot find the rubber dampener that goes in between that bracket and the frame mount. So I might actually have to make something to do that with. So all of this has been going on about, I've got material to do this, but I need to kind of know what I'm going to be using for those rubber dampeners. The camera just jerked over. How much space those rubber dampeners take up before I can figure out the height of the brackets and everything in relationship to the frame and the engine. So that's been going on. The other things was, that the head, I had issues with the head where I broke off some of the injector nozzles. I talked to a friend of mine, and a diesel mechanic, and he kind of told me how to get them out, and he says you might not be able to get them out. You might have to put them on a mill and try and bore them out. And what I did is put the head up on the bench, soaked the injectors in PB Blaster for a little while, and then flipped it over and took a brass punch and a hammer, and what we'll do is cut to that right now. I'm over here at the bench. What I've got is a head off the A3 Cummins, and as you probably know from previous videos, when I went to pull the injectors out, 3 of them broke. I've still got part of the injector in cylinder 1, 3, and 5. What I've done is I sat that head up, sprayed some PB Blaster in there. And I've got to see if I can get these injectors out. That was pretty easy. Well, that was really easy. But something went right. Let me put this stuff away, flip that head back over again. Next thing I'm going to have to do is on the exhaust manifold, try and get those broken studs out. There are those broken injectors that I just popped out of there. I don't even know if I really even damaged them by doing that. Not that you could ever get them back together again, but those threads are stretched out on the things. But anyways, there they are. So what I'm going to do with the head is bring it over here, and I know I've discussed this in other videos how I was going to take it out and whether I was going to use a vertical or horizontal mill, but what I'm going to do is bring it over here to the horizontal mill. And what I can do is set the head flat on the bed of the mill, which would put the exhaust ports perpendicular to that, or the studs that go into the exhaust manifold parallel with the bed or parallel with the cutting bit that I'm going to be using. So what I'll probably do is put it up here, and what I'm going to do is get an appropriate size left-hand drill bit and try and drill into them, hoping that possibly that the left-hand drill bit will take them out. If not, then what I'll do is I'll drill them out and re-tap them. Once you get them drilled out just slightly below the size of them, usually you can get a tap to go in there and it'll cut the rest of the old stud out and refurbish the threads in the manifold. But there is that. I'm also, just as a side note, what I will do is, I told you that I've got that 2.5 inch angle iron, and it's got to be cut down to 2 1/4 or maybe a little less if I want to put that inner plate flat with the frame rail. So what I'll do is I'll put that over here and just mill it off with a end mill along the surface of it so that it gets down to 2 1/4 or slightly less. But that's where the head is going. Now let me interject another something that I found for the truck, and then at the end what I'm going to do is I came up with the motor mounts came in, the 2 that I had talked about, the post type motor mounts for the back, but I also got something for the front, and I will show them at the end of the video. Okay, so now I'm over here by the rear end, and you know I've discussed in other videos my plight about the rear end. If you don't know your make and model for a auto parts store, they can't help you. They don't know anything. So as you know, I had found the bearings and I had found that rotor at Napa. Now, let me just say one thing. I have not tried to test fit that rotor on there, so I'm not 100% sure that that rotor is the correct rotor for it. I mean, we took it out of the box and we compared it to the other rotor, and it looks the same, but looking the same doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to fit on there. But I regress here. You know that I had found the bearings, but I was having an issue with the seals. I couldn't find the seals. Well, a friend of mine happened to come in the shop the other day, and he is not a mechanic or anything else, and I was kind of showing him the rear end and talking about my plight of not being able to find the seals and giving him the numbers off of the seals, and they really didn't mean anything to anybody. And he says, well, have you tried this place down in Buffalo? Why don't you give them a call, because these people are really excellent at it. And the name of the place is called Acme Bearing. And I called them this morning, and I told him what I thought I had, and I gave him those seal numbers off of what was on the seal. And he said to me, those numbers don't sound familiar at all. So is there any way that you could bring the hub down with the seal so we can take a look at it? And I says, yeah. And he says, well, if you can't, maybe if you gave me the information off of the rear end, I might be able to help you that way too. And I says, no, I can bring it down. I can bring it down this morning. So I went down to the place, and it's just a let's call it a little bearing seal place. And I told him what I had, and I says, it's out in the truck. Do you want me to bring it in? So I carried it in to him. He took one look at it and knew exactly what it was. He says, I know exactly what this thing is. That's a Ford F750 rear end out of a bus. And he went back to a shelf, pulled off of a seal off of the shelf, brought it out, and it was an identical match. And not only was it an identical match, the seal was also a Timken, which happens to be the bearings that that were originally in the rear end. Now, Timken bearings and seals are made in the United States. And he says, did you get the bearings for it? And I says, well, yeah, Napa set me up with the bearings. And he said, they're probably made by this SKF company. And he says, SKF was an American company, but they bought out a Chinese place, and there's a very good chance that your bearings are made in China. And he says, if you can take those bearings back, or if you don't want the bearings that are from Napa and possibly made in China, he thought they would be, the country of origin would be on the back, but it's not. The only thing that's listed on the back is Elgin, Illinois. He said that he could get me Timken, the Timken bearings that were in there to begin with, and bearings that are made in the United States. So I'm still debating that. I don't know what to do about that. I'm not sure how bad these bearings are. I'm going to try and do some research and see if anybody's had any problems with these SKF bearings. But anyways, got the seals for the rear axle. So some things are starting to come together. Now, the next thing on the head is I've got to get it over to the mill in between doing other things on the truck, get it over to the mill and try and get them broken studs out of the exhaust ports. I don't know if I told you when I was talking about the rubber bushings on that. I did find them. I did get them ordered. They should probably be here in a couple of days, and hopefully as soon as I see them and figure out a way of how I'm going to support that rear half of the engine off of those, I can pull this back out and get to work on that front cross member. That front cross member has to come out and a new one be fabricated for it. But let me bring you back. Okay, so I know this video is getting incredibly long, but I just wanted to share with you that I got the mount for the rear, and that's how it goes together. There's a sleeve or a bushing in there, 5/8 bolt, and it would go up through. There would be a plate underneath. It would go up through and provide a movable support for that. I also received, what I bought was these pucks that are, now they're not specifically for this type of mount, but I saw a picture of another mount, and it wasn't for a Cummins, but it was for another one. And what they had done, they had basically the same design, a plate, and this thing is just going to go underneath it, and it'll rest on these two, let's call them pucks. So there will be the mount for the front. I still got to come up with a mount for the rear of the transmission, but that really isn't as important right now. I could probably I might even be able, if I had enough space, if I could get two more of these, be able to utilize them in the rear of the engine somehow. Maybe. We'll see. But anyways, there's that. I got those engine mounts. Gonna start working on that front bracket. Now, I guarantee this is gonna be the last thing, and then the video will end. I talked about discussing about the other brackets, being able to remove them. I don't think this front bracket, being able to remove it is crucial, because it will never be in the way of anything. The motor would lift up off of it, and it would just be like these other unmovable brackets in here, kind of just up near it. So this one I might design in there. Still going to bolt it to the frame, but it might be welded kind of in place, so that even if you unbolted it from the frame, you probably wouldn't be able to get it out. It probably wouldn't be able to slide out. But anyways, that's it for this update. Probably the next chapter will be me starting work on motor mounts.